All right. Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. I'm your host, Matt Hines. Excited to have y'all here as we get, towards the end of summer. We've got college football starting this weekend, week 0, the Aboo's Moosh for the fall season, and baseball playoffs wrapping up. Bill and I were just talking about our Cubbies. Excited that they've already taken 3 of 4 in a 5-game series against the division rival Brewers. So go Cubs. Just very excited to have you all here. If you're here live joining Sales Pipeline Radio in the middle of your workday and work week, thank you for making us part of your day. You can be part of the show. If you have a comment on LinkedIn or YouTube as we do this, we will see those. We can bring those on screen. We can reference those. We can answer your questions live. And thank you for doing that. If you're watching or listening on demand, thank you as well. Over 500,000 people have downloaded and listened to Sales Pipeline Radio, and excited to have you as part of that group. Every episode, past, present, and future of Sales Pipeline Radio, always available at salespipelineradio.com. Excited today to have Bill Doinen, who's the Chief Revenue Officer of Mural, join us today. We're going to talk about orchestration, go-to-market efficiency. We're going to talk about why pipeline is always important, but is so different than it's ever been before. Bill, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I appreciate it even more having a discussion around the Cubs and one of the best of all time, Ryan Sandberg. So no, thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I was sitting on my back deck last night watching the end of that game and thinking, are we going to walk in winning runs? And it was a little more nail-bitey than I wanted, but I'm very happy with the outcome. You guys did some really interesting research earlier this year, sort of focused on what I guess I would call go-to-market orchestration and the real gap for a lot of organizations and how their go-to-market teams align and how that affects their ability to drive predictable pipeline. I'd love to have you dig into the research and just what you hear from your customers in terms of the challenges they're addressing on that front.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think if you take a step back and say, hey, why all of a sudden has this bubbled up? Why have we, double clicked into orchestration, or what's the impact of being misaligned? Is that a lot of the pain points have bubbled up, right? With it getting harder to retain customers, harder to go find new pipeline. And, I kind of make this joke is like, I think you have to move on beyond collaboration. So, I came from a place that taught me a lot about sales, right? Salesforce, one of the biggest, sales machines out there. And looking back, I kind of realized like, wow, I was at the center of the root cause of the problem, because you would have, 20, 25 people, in deal calls, or, all this work happening in silos, but nothing really would happen to move things forward. And so it wasn't necessarily, we were meeting all the time, we talked all the time. Even here, we really have started to be biased towards action of like, we are not getting off a call unless there's a call to action, because when you really look at that, we know that really slows teams down.
Mm-hmm.
But Matt, what has really stood out is, what does it mean for the customer experience? And so when account teams really lack action or lack consistency, it really creates this fragmented experience for customers, right? And one of the biggest pain points is always around account transitions. Like, you want to applaud organizations that promote from within, or people move on. But, I fielded probably a dozen calls last year around, hey, this is the 5th rep in 2 years. You're not going to stop that. What you can stop is just, what's the experience for customers throughout this process? And when teams aren't syncing up and biased to action, it's just such a bad experience for customers. And that's where that kind of burnout comes in.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about the difference between playbooks and systems? Because I think that's really at the heart of doing this consistently, right? I think a lot of companies have, definitions of what a lead and opportunity is. Can you talk about just the gap many companies have between playbooks and systems, and why a system approach is so important?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I feel like it's such a powerful question, because, the pipeline playbooks, haven't evolved much, right? I think it's more about the ways in which you go about getting pipeline. And I think what organizations are doing, what we're doing, what other teams are doing, we just spent a few days in Chicago to say, hey, let's take a step back and really think about some of the problem statements of what we're trying to solve for, and then build systems around it, then build plays, right? Whether it's the ability to measure the plays or having the right tools. Like, how do you take some of the lift off of, as a CRO, I get probably 30 prospecting, 30 emails a day from people. And like, how do you allow more strategic approaches to that, whether it's AI, automation? So I think companies have realized, I think 2 things, Matt, it's like both sides of it. Is you can't just throw a tool at every challenge.
Right.
You know, you just can't throw something on top of something and then throw something on top of something. You have to take a step back and say, hey, what are we truly trying to solve for? Or what are we truly trying to do? And for us, a big one is really breaking into the different LOBs, the different lines of
Mhm.
business, right? And it's not, talking to different leaders at companies like Glean or ServiceNow, Salesforce, Slack. Everyone kind of has the same thing of like, well, we really need to break into new lines of business to find new revenue streams. But you have to take a step back and say, do we have the right systems, the right tools? Do we have the right materials? Do we have the right messaging to go create pipeline? You can't just take something and flip it sideways and say, okay, now we're going to do it for the same thing. And so I think organizations have really started to notice, like, wait a minute, our pipeline efforts aren't working.
Right.
Let's now take a step back and say, who are we trying to go after? What are the systems that we need to go do it? What are the tools we need? What's the messaging we need? Then let's activate the playbook versus the other way around. Because I do think, Matt, it was activate the plays,
Mhm.
then put systems and tools around it when it's too late.
Talking today on Sales Pipeline Radio with Bill Dwynen, a Cubs fan and Chief Revenue Officer at Mural. And I'm looking at the other side of my screen here at this study that you guys did in the spring. This go-to-market alignment gap is what you talked about here. And there's one stat that I want to point out that sort of stands out to me as sort of this, not only a gap between go-to-market teams, but a gap between leaders and people on the front lines doing the work. So when you guys ask the question, how often do you experience misalignment between your go-to-market teams? 31% of decision makers says that happened on a daily basis. 46% of individual contributors said that happened on a daily basis. So there's a wide gap between what leaders perceive and what those doing the actual work are facing on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes I describe this as the difference between jazz hands at sales kickoff and what actually happens Tuesday morning. Right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that go-to-market alignment gap and why it's so important for leaders to understand at a almost atomic level the gaps in how work gets done?
Yeah, it's a great call, and I was really blown away by the data because when the account teams are out there doing work, they really are the ones that feel the pain. And so when marketing and product and sales aren't aligned, it really makes it complicated to go to a customer. It makes it complicated to accelerate deals. But I think leaders have this belief that our teams are working, right? I see the number of meetings, and that's why we kind of have this, this kind of inside way of saying it of like, I think there's too much collaboration. Like
Mhm.
that's part of the challenge. It's that, so from a leader's perspective, I see my teams back to back all day. I see, I made the example last year that within any given deal motion, there was 12 different documents we were collaborating in. And so I think leaders see work that's happening.
Yeah.
So they assume that, hey, our teams are working, right? How many times have you heard leaders say, like, our teams are out there grinding, they're with our customers? Then the teams are like, I'm not getting what I want from product. And products like our salespeople aren't out there telling a good story. And the customer is just kind of in the wings and feeling the pain of it. And so that's where you kind of see some net numbers. And I think I've been guilty of that sometimes throughout my career where you're just like, yeah, my teams are working. And then what we're trying to do internally is like, how do we activate that feedback loop
Yeah.
so there's more alignment happening? And so when we show up in front of the customer, it is aligned, it is consistent. And then also when you look at, not to pivot away from pipeline, but just the drain on employees, like the number of repetitive meetings because of misalignment is what's really kind of driving that burnout people are experiencing, especially in an asynchronous world where teams are very distributed. Whether you're in an office or not, teams are very distributed.
Well, the amount of work is a really terrible way of measuring, your productivity. We've
Yeah.
seen a lot of examples of what Gartner calls collaboration drag,
Yeah.
which is how hard it is to actually get work done. And it's impacting speed to market, it's impacting revenue impact, it's impacting morale. Right.
Yeah.
And so simply just doing more. I mean, all the investors we talk to, all the PE firms right now are all do more with less. And they're pointing at AI as a solution. AI is an ingredient to that.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a systematic way of breaking down the work that needs to get done so it gets done effectively and efficiently, you're not only going to not hit your number, you're going to reach a constraint in what you can get done, and you're going to lose your best people
Yeah.
who are getting frustrated and burnt out by having done it. Talk about the importance of those workflows and systems to that get more done with less message that is so
Yeah.
prevalent right now.
It's it's such a powerful statement that you made because the drain, the way that you kind of referred to it, is I just feel like, I always say some of my least productive days are when I'm back to back all day.
Hmm.
Like you actually need time to be productive and think and move forward. And so that drain, the impact that it has on employees. And what I love about what we're doing at Mural is I think there's two things. Number one, we're using our, what's the saying, drinking our own Kool-Aid, right? Bringing a
Yeah.
visual component to the sales process, right? If you think about, we started on this journey about, okay, we can build this cool visual account discovery template that teams can use and everyone's in the same place, and you can create automation. They can pull in, information about a customer from their 10K, so on and so forth. Then we started to realize that we had to move away from a moment in time and say collaboration is fractured throughout every part of the customer journey. And so how do you not only surface the right information, how do you make it more visual and clear over who's owning and taking action? And then what we've seen in our companies that have that kind of that matrix org map where they have
Hmm.
7 clouds, whether it's like a LinkedIn that has 4 or 5 different product lines
Yeah.
all selling to the same customer, or a Salesforce, Oracle, IBM that has multiple clouds, is when people jump into the deal midway through, that usually is creating more work. And what we're seeing is when you bring in this visual kind of actionable way of working, the teams are able to get caught up sooner. And so someone joins a deal motion and there's not 7 calls to get them brought up to speed, or a leader jumps in. And so that's what we're doing internally and what we're bringing to our clients, because the retention part is so critical.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the, how are you impacting the customer experience? And so retaining your top talent is more, it's always, there's always a component of, can they be successful? Do they have a great career path? Do they
Hmm.
feel compensated for the work that they're doing? But it's also like, can I get work done here? Do I feel supported, and do I have
Yeah.
alignment?
Yeah. Those are what you just said. Those three things are so critical to making this work, right? And I think you've seen it. I've seen it in the work we've done, the before and afters, right? Of companies that are really just in fire drill mode all the time to
Yeah.
becoming more efficient, more effective, faster to market. Employees that feel like they're contributing better, their morale is better, their collaboration is better. For a lot of companies, especially larger companies that are sort of facing that collaboration drag challenge right now, knowing what to do next can be kind of intimidating.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts that have to be addressed here. Everything from workflow, taxonomy, racy, daisy, like thinking through all the methodology of getting that right. Where should people start? Where's a good place
Yeah.
for go-to-market leaders to start to chip away at this?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's tough, but I think if you take a step back, right? So if I'm going to date myself a bit here, but when I first got into sales, it was like desktop computer,
Hmm.
desk phone, and
Yep.
spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Now we live in a world where the average salesperson has, 47 tools at their disposal. They have Sales Nav, they have, Zoom Info, they have Focus, they have this, they have that, they have
Hmm.
all these different things. And I think what got us here, Matt, was never truly taking a step back to try to solve for the challenge.
Hmm.
And so we were on a call with a CEO of a pretty notable company a few weeks ago, and we walked him through kind of this idea of more collaborative selling. And he was like, you know what? We've been struggling with account planning for years, and we kept throwing stuff on top of it.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
like kept throwing a different solution at it, right? Because you can do account planning anywhere, you can do
Right.
it in a million places, but it's really taking a step back and saying, what are we trying to solve for with account planning? What are the current challenges, and how do we truly address it? And so what I would encourage leaders to do is, and it's hard, you're closing the month, you're closing the quarter, then you're planning for next year. Like, it is fast, right? It feels like it's hard to take a step back. And sometimes it's annual plan,
Hmm.
sometimes it's end of quarter, but there's got to be a point in saying, okay, what do we think are the key moments in time throughout a customer life cycle? There's the account plan, there's customer discovery, there's, team selling, there's multi-cloud selling, there's even, we've started to use Mural for mutual close plans.
Hmm.
How
Hmm.
do we bring a more visual component versus tagging a client in a static Word doc? And so my answer, Matt, is like, how we got here is people kept throwing tools at the problem versus taking a step back and saying, what are we truly trying to solve for?
Hmm.
How can we meet our people and customers where they are? And how do we make it frictionless? How do we pull in AI and workflows? And I'm not sure if you've seen some of the kind of articles floating around, but AI for the sake of AI is not helpful.
Yep.
And so it's, how are you intentional? Like, one of the things I love, we showed this to a customer today, is like, in our account plan, you use AI to bring in all the top line things about what a company does. And so now you're dangerous going into a first call, whether you're an SDR or a CEO, that I know what just came from company X's 10K. And so it really is taking a step back and saying, what are we truly trying to solve for? Then comes your point about systems. Then comes your point about plays. It just used to be, let's throw a Band-Aid on it, but it's caught up. It's like running into the wind, and the wind keeps getting faster.
Right. We're gonna have to wrap things up here. If you want to learn more about this, I'd highly encourage you to go do a Google search or even an LLM search for mural go-to-market alignment gap. You'll find the research. It's ungated. It's available. There's even slides to download of the data. If you want to help your internal team understand the real problem here and the impact it's having on revenue attainment for organizations that are addressing it today, definitely check that out. Bill, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. And go Cubs.
Go Cubs go. I tell you what, that is the cheesiest song I've ever heard, and I love listening to it at the end of Cubs win games at Wrigley. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. Until next week, have a great week. We'll see you soon.